Good morning, everybody. A very, very warm welcome, particularly if you are a guest to Pilgrims. Maybe this is your first time at the school or in the Pilgrims Hall. It's an amazing building which we're privileged to have as part of our little prep school. For those that are curious and haven't been here before, 1322 is the date at which this hall was built, and it's got the oldest surviving hammer beam roof in the country. As you will be well aware, today's discussion is about artificial intelligence or large language models or machine learning, and there in itself is an entire parley as to which would be most appropriate to help us think about the way in which these things work. But today we're going with the ubiquitous AI, for want of perhaps some better terminology. A topic that, depending on your point of view, is either the greatest educational opportunity since the invention of the printing press, or the reason your child can now produce a flawless 2,000-word essay in 7 seconds whilst in their pyjamas when they're 6. AI, we're often told, is the future, which is reassuring because it has certainly already arrived, unpacked its bags, rearranged the furniture, and is currently helping pupils brainstorm homework answers with an enthusiasm that borders on the suspicious. Now, in education, we're very good at preparing pupils for the world as it was. We're pretty good at preparing them for the world as it is, and today's challenge is rather harder. How do we prepare young people for a world that is being updated more frequently than their apps, usually overnight and without asking permission? Today's phrasing, AI, the genie out of the bottle, is deliberately chosen, but this genie does not grant 3 wishes and disappear. It's very much staying, it's rewriting our coursework, and it asks for feedback. This is not, however, a discussion about panic, nor about prohibition, or is it? It's about judgment, purpose, and professionalism. And I'm delighted that we're able to explore it with 5 senior educationalists who think deeply about curriculum, pedagogy, ethics, and what schools are ultimately for, and who are grappling with these questions not in theory, but in practice every day. There will be a chance for audience Q&A towards the end, so I'm sure as your curiosity is pricked as we go, do store those questions, and we will take questions from the floor after the main body of the discussion. So, in order to begin, let me introduce our 5 fine panellists this morning in alphabetical order by surname, just to avoid anybody reading prejudice into the sequence at all. So, first of all, immediately to my right is Sam Cook. Sam is currently Assistant Head Underschool at Charterhouse, where he oversees the academic and pastoral support for year 9 to 11 pupils. Before that, he was a housemaster at Cranley School for 7 years and has worked in boarding schools for over 20 years, having various pastoral and academic roles. He teaches philosophy and RS, which is no doubt going to be quite useful today, as well as overseeing digital strategy and partnership work, again, rather useful today, and is an enthusiastic and, in his own words, hapless sportsman, with cricket being one of his passions.
Morning, everyone.
Next to Sam, we've got Scott Crawford. Dr. Crawford is the very recently started new headmaster at Lancing College, where he began in September. Prior to this, Scott was deputy head of Magdalen College School, Oxford, and before joining MSc, he spent 9 years at Highgate School, where he was housemaster, head of biology, head of science. He holds a PhD in biology from the University of York and a biological sciences degree from Oxford. Scott is also a trained inspector with ISI and a school governor. Being headmaster of said person's alma mater, he also has direct access to any best hidden files on a certain T. Butcher Esquire. Ian Knowles is from Churches College, where he is a deputy head. He began his career teaching biology and coaching rugby and cricket at Tiffin School in 1994. After marrying in 1999, he taught in Dubai for a year before returning to the UK to teach at KCS Wimbledon, followed by City of London Freeman's, where he was head of biology and head of house. Ian was appointed head of sixth form first at Churches in 2012 and then deputy head academic in 2014. He still coaches rugby and cricket. He has 3 grown-up children, and his wife is indeed head of EYFS at Churches Junior School. Next to Ian, Elizabeth Stone, be familiar to a number of you, is headmaster of Winchester College and has experience of both co-ed and single-sex day and boarding schools in Australia and the UK. Prior to Winchester, she spent 9 years as principal of Queenswood School, Sydney, a leading independent girls' school with 900 pupils. She was vice principal of Cheltenham Ladies' College from 2012 to 14, and immediately before this, she spent 3 years at Winchester as a maths don, in fact, and undermaster. At Oxford University, she studied as a Rhodes Scholar and completed a master's degree at University College before going on to specialise in commercial contract law before commencing her teaching career. Do not cross her path. And finally, very warm welcome to Liz Wells from Sevenoaks, where she is Senior Deputy Head. She joined Sevenoaks this year from Bradfield College, where she was Deputy Head Academic. Prior to this, she was Head of Economics at North London Collegiate, where she also worked as Assistant Head Upper School and Deputy Safeguarding Lead. She started her teaching career at Highgate School, where she completed her PGCE, and before teaching, Liz worked in the UK government as an economic advisor for both the Ministry of Justice and HM Treasury. She holds 2 degrees in economics, a first class from York and an MPhil from Cambridge. She also earned a distinction in her Masters of Business Administration from Coventry. Feeling suitably diminished, I will now continue with the topic that we're really all here to discuss. So, very warm welcome, panellists. We're going to kick off with really just something that will help us, I think, focus upon what you're experiencing right now in your schools. How is the arrival of widely accessible AI changing the educational landscape? And what are the realities that schools now have to accept, do we feel? Elizabeth, may I start with you?
You may start. Let me start with the positives. On the plus side, there are certain things that you can do to build it into what you're doing. You can, it can help with, just the sort of the admin of things, and we for instance have been training up some of the pupils in, if you want to do a really good study timetable and give it all the parameters and it can sort of spit it out like that, and there are some good things that you can do with it, and it can do some interesting things, but if I'm honest, educationally I don't yet see much gain. And that comes down to we're trying to get them to think, and if you cognitively offload it, as the phrase goes, then you're defeating the purpose, right? So if someone said to me, well, why go to the gym? I've got a robot that can lift it for me. It's like you're missing the point. So the point of going to school is it's a gymnasium for the minds, right? And so the fact that it can do the thinking for you is not a positive, by and large. So we're trying not to be too defensive about it. One of the things that springs often to mind, first of all, is the cheating thing, and that is absolutely a problem. I will be interested to see what happens to coursework, particularly in public examinations and GCSEs and A-levels, because what's going on there. And you can also end up with silly things where, I write it in ChatGPT and you mark it in ChatGPT, and then, no human being needs to get involved. So we are already redesigning our curricula and our timetable to create more contact time, so that the tasks that we used to set for them to work on independently are now actually being done in silence on paper in the classroom, and therefore what they're being asked to do in the evenings in their independent study is preparing research and notes and so on, and you can already see that's quite a significant change. It has an impact on your teaching time and so on. Query, I won't talk for too long, but query for the future: do we end up with some kind of premium certification where it looks like 1746, because you go into a room and you have a paper and a pencil and everybody knows it's your own work? I'm interested to see where that goes.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Well, on that point, at churches we are still pen and paper. We don't have devices one-to-one with the pupils. So AI has not affected us in the classroom as much. We prevaricated and delayed on the one-to-one decision, and now we're in an environment where the parents don't seem to want it, pupils don't seem to want it. So we have bookable devices for IT-based lessons, but largely the work is in exercise books, pen and paper. So like Elizabeth said, the work they do in class, we know it's their work, and they're using their brains. Of course, homework is a big issue. We know they're using it at homework. We've been through an evolution since ChatGPT was released in 2022, I suppose. When it first came out, we were very punitive and we were worried about cheating and plagiarism, which has always been around, right? I mean, they've had Google, they've been able to produce essays for years, but ChatGPT produced an original piece of writing, which was very hard to prove. So, but we now are happy with, we can still spot when the work is suspiciously good, can't we? So we know when they've used it. We've got GPT-0, Turnitin, which can return a percentage likelihood that it's written by AI or written by a human. And when challenged, the pupils are very good. They can, fair enough. You got the bangs to rights. Honestly, they sing like canaries, and they do it again. So we've been through that and educated the pupils about, the ChatGPT won't be with you in the exam. So they do know that they want to do well, and they only really use it when they're up against it. They've got 3 essays due the next day, and it's a shortcut. And we're now moving on to thinking about how we can use it more positively in education, where we introduced a traffic light system. So we have red tasks, amber tasks, and green tasks. So red means absolutely cannot use AI. Amber, you can use it to help you generate some ideas, to get started on a task, but the work must be your own. You must cite where you've used it. And then green tasks, you can use AI. For example, French teacher recently used AI to generate some French text, but the task was to actually read it with correct accent, pronunciation, and so that the important bit was not AI, but AI was used to facilitate the task.
Can I? One of the things that Elizabeth mentioned was cognitive offloading and the idea of stealing the struggle, and the impact on teaching and learning is a real one, and I'm absolutely seeing that. But something that I'm thinking about too is social and emotional outsourcing rather than cognitive outsourcing, and children reaching out to chatbots and AI tools to get the sorts of advice that they would ordinarily come to teachers to seek, or from their peers. There's been some recent work that's looked at the use of, I'm not on any dating sites, but I know they exist. And there was a study done by Illinois recently looking into young people using AI tools to help them respond to messages on dating apps rather than crafting those messages themselves. So the wonderful thing that we can do in school is all the stuff around teaching and learning that enables young people to enter into real life confidently as communicators. And I'm worried that AI is stealing some of that struggle as well as the intellectual struggle, and should be an area that we focus on.
The one thing I've really enjoyed about AI, it's enabled us to have a really open conversation with our students about what education is for. And I'll just share a little anecdote. We were talking to them, we want to talk openly about what it is, how it works. And I was walking behind, I'm sure you all find this when you walk behind students and listen to them chat, you can often hear a lot about what they're thinking. And one said, how sad is it that you work this hard to get into this school and then you don't use your brain and you use AI? And then we're having really interesting conversations around the environmental and sustainable side of it, and intellectual property theft as well. So we're really enjoying that, engaging with them on that level, whilst everything you said I agree with completely. And one thing that I guess the 2 pillars of what we look at Sevenoaks, mainly because we're an IB ethos school, is critical thinking is at the core. And it means it's brought to the fore, using your brain critically and training your brain and using it like a gym, exactly like Elizabeth said, is at the core. And the other thing we talk about a lot is meaning and purpose. We partner with the Harvard Flourishing Programme to say education is more than the certificate, it's more than you learn, and thinking is part of that, but also finding who you are. So we're really looking at reshaping our lower school curriculum to talk about character education and building those skills. Because one of the big questions our parents want to talk to us about is employability. What on earth how do you prepare the children now for a future of employability? They're so nervous about that. But when you bring it all back, having strong meaning and purpose, knowing your character and being able to think critically feels like something we've always known as educators and kind of isn't new. But this is shining a light on what we can really do as educators. So I don't think we've solved all the problems, but it certainly is a really interesting debate, and I'll be really interested to see how it continues to go.
Sam, anything additional?
Yeah, I think just one other thing to add to that is technology as a tool has been around for donkey's years, and schools every so often have to rethink how a new emerging technology needs to be embedded and educated for use. Now, 30 years ago, you had that with calculators. 20 years ago, it was Google and the internet was supposedly the age where it was going to do away with the necessity for knowledge. That hasn't happened, and we know that. Now, AI, with the power that it has, actually has far more risks than some of those other technologies. But the reality is, schools have always adapted to new emerging technologies. And the key is actually, how do we educate our children to both grasp the opportunities that comes with a new emerging technology, but also to do that thinking, to do that real depth of critical thinking analysis that means that they recognise where are the limitations of that technology, and we all know with hallucinations and bias and everything else that comes with AI, there are significant risks both from the academic offloading and from the safeguarding pastoral world. But as a school, our duty is to take a balanced approach to say, well, okay, let's educate our children in how they can use all of the really good things that AI can give them, but also recognising where those risks are. And what I would say one of our key responsibilities is to be showing and demonstrating to children what those opportunities are, both in terms of that future employability, because I'm sure most of you are coming into day-to-day contact with AI in your workplaces. We've got to help these kids understand that that's what life is going to look like, but knowing when is the right task to use that AI versus stick to the old pen and paper. So I would say, just to fully agree with everything that's being said, it's also about trying to educate the children to know when is the right task to use these technologies for. Sometimes pen and paper, spot on. Other times, yeah, AI might be a really useful tool to use. The key is when and for what.
Thank you. Now, the danger with a broad-ranging introductory question is that you cover most of the bases that you're going to cover in subsequent questions, but I think we need to drill down into these areas a little bit. We've covered all sorts of things from areas that we have to start honing from a more human point of view with critical thinking. We've talked about ways in which the AI can become almost a relational, emotional problem as well as an academic problem. How do we... So here's a question that's not on my list, but let's put the cat amongst the pigeons. You know, here we are amongst a body of folk who are all very interested, some of whom are paying a lot of money to send children to schools such as ours. Do we as independent schools see a different type of risk beyond academic and pastoral to us as fee-paying schools when something like AI has come along on the horizon? Or do you think actually precisely the opposite because of some of the reasons that we've just discussed and maybe our opinions that we do those particularly strongly?
I mean, there's some scary ideas about what education might look like. I heard about a school where all they do is the kids come in, they do 5 hours of what they call cramming. They sit, AI, algorithm-based learning, and in the afternoon they do some sport and activities and they go home. Yeah, exactly. I agree. But I fundamentally believe it's a human business, and all of us know that we create a community, we create memories, we create people and characters, and I think it's just, again, a lovely reminder of, yes, it can do really powerful things really quickly that can seem really intimidating, but it does shine a light on everything else that schools do that can be, I guess, taken for granted a little bit in its power in developing people.
Tim, I mean, I see it almost as an opportunity. One of the things that education systems, government, nationwide are incredibly bad at is responding quickly. And so we are very fortunate, each of us, to work in a school where we can respond much faster than a nationwide system is going to do. I think the real challenge, and I'm afraid I'm much less sanguine than some of the statements that were made earlier, there's how we talk about how we created an obesogenic society. This is an idea that Daisy Christodoulou, who's a great commentator, sort of crystallised beautifully. Our genetics haven't changed. We've got an enormous obesity problem. Everybody knows what you should do. Everybody knows what you should eat and that you should exercise more, and that, we all know that. But the fact is, if you build in the conditions where those things are constantly available, people have inbuilt biological impulses to take the easy way and they do. And we are really struggling with that. Well, we are now entering a stage of a stupidogenic society, right? So I'm ashamed of myself that my geographical knowledge of the local sort of area is so poor because I use a sat-nav. And on any individual occasion, I know it would be better. And I would like to be a person who has this map in my head. I don't, right? Because I'm in a hurry and I haven't got, and the thing and, remembering and writing a post-it note and putting it on the steering wheel, right? That's what you're asking 10-year-olds or 14-year-olds or 16-year-olds to do when they're not feeling confident, when they've got lots of work to do, and it's all just too easy. Right? And so the idea that we can sort of go, well, look, we're going to put it in front of you. Where do you want to be in 10 years' time? I mean, of course, they get it, and we should do that, and we are doing that. But the idea that that is enough, I'm sorry, I just cannot accept that. And I think the grown-ups need to step up. And we need to unabashedly say, we're the grown-ups in the room, and we're just going to make this hard for you, because the whole point of an education is to make things tough so that you can overcome it and see what you're capable of and get those skills. So in a way, I would predict that the independent sector is going to pivot on that faster than the state schools can. And that's no criticism. It's just, it should be that way because we only have to do it for our own communities. So I think we can do something quite special.
And I think the opportunity for us, particularly as boarding schools, is that we get to control the young people's time a lot more. And I think that's certainly something that I find attractive to parents. We can guide what they do when they're doing their prep in the evening and steer them away from digital tools or towards them. And the secret sauce in independent schools is the core curricula, the playmaking, the drama, the sport, all of those human enriching activities that we have in spades, I think will become more and more appealing and attractive to parents who already seek independent education.
Yeah, although Year 10 does not like me at the moment, can I just say? Because their parents love it, but what we've said about devices and things in their free time, but we have to step up.
Just adding, I think it comes back to Liz's point about what we really feel is the true purpose of education behind it. And while, yes, you've got to jump through the hoops of GCSEs and exams, I think most of us would say actually the knowledge part of education is one bit, but actually all of our schools are offering a far broader holistic education that really focuses on each individual and developing that character. And in a world that is becoming ever more flexible and the skills that these pupils are going to need, they are going to be ever more changing, be it adaptability, teamwork, etc. And all of our schools are the places where those soft skills get really harnessed and developed through rich subject knowledge, but also through the other things that are going on in the conversations in the boarding houses, in the co-curricular offerings, etc. And it's that character development that will mean that these students in the future are going to be the people that are still setting themselves up for real success.
Can I just tie into the points that both of you made, which is that the ubiquity of the devices and the availability and the fact that, Microsoft or Google is now building AI into all of their tools, which they've spent decades infiltrating into, I'm using a deliberately provocative word, infiltrating into schools and education systems. So it's really hard for us to weed it out, right? The whole thing about devices is really crucial because it infiltrates everything. Where you can create a peer group where nobody has access to the devices at the same time. So, sure, they might have it at certain times of day, but that there are chunks of the day where your entire peer group is not, then there's no fear of missing out. And that's, I think, something where, just to be honest, I'm glad I'm not head of a day school at the moment, because it would be much more of a challenge. And for me, as the head of a boarding school, I have an easier run on that. And that's why Year 10 doesn't like me at the moment, because we restricted some access to their devices and said, we want you to go out and play. And, there will be 7 minutes of boredom before you do that. And boredom is so uncomfortable. But that's a challenge then, whether, if you're a parent of a child who is not in a boarding school, I think parents need to think really carefully about how do I create a community and a social group for my child of like-minded parents, and how do I activate that? Jonathan Haidt writes a lot about this collective action problem, if you're interested to read up on that.
I was just going to build on that. We've had a big change. So talking about devices, but also mobile phones, where years 7 and 8 are completely mobile phone free. They have a brick phone provided for them. And the change from last year to this year in how they play, how they interact in the community is absolutely enormous. And it's interesting you say that boarding day, because we have boarding and day. So we have so much control over a third of our community, but not the other. And that creates quite a lot of tensions as an educator to try and balance that and bring parents in to the conversation to support that environment. But it has such a huge impact. And yeah, that consistency of approach, I completely agree.
Yeah. And sorry, one more. Just as a parent, you feel hostage to the laxest standards of your child's social group. Right? That's a sort of a spiral downwards. So anything that you can do as parents and that we can facilitate as schools to talk to each other and say, because your kids are going to say everybody else has got it. And it's usually not true. And that, I think getting parents, normalising parents having these, conversations about how do you handle technology in your family, how would you like to handle it, that's a new thing we haven't had to do. We respect people's privacy.
And you mentioned Jonathan Haidt a moment ago. One of the things that, again, we're well familiar with is, well, I'm sure parents and educationalists we're well familiar with this, is the importance of play within childhood and the fact that that is biologically woven in for a reason. It develops the neurological connections that are necessary to become a successful adult. And these sorts of technologies and so forth can stream that, forgive that dreadful pun, in ways that, really do sort of undermine a lot of that. Ian, if I can come to you, because you mentioned the fact that Churches has taken a very deliberate, sort of largely paper and pen-based approach and these sorts of things. In thinking about that and in reflecting in general, what do you think is the age at which to introduce pupils to AI, but also and in what ways? So there's AI conceptually and there's AI actually practically and how it's used. What are your thoughts around that in terms of how one introduces it and when?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say is that if we think we're the ones introducing AI to them, we're very much mistaken. We know full well that they're using it at home. We're a day school and they go home and we know they use it. I think, but we have built how to use AI into our Key Stage 3 computing curriculum. If they're going to use it, then teach them how to use it well. For example, the level of detail you could put into a prompt to improve the quality of what comes out, compared to, say, Google, where it can't really deal with that much detail. That's something that we've learnt, and we're always behind them, aren't we? They're way ahead of us. So we're learning from them, and then we're spreading the word. This is how you use it. But we're an 11 to 18 day school. Our first years are using it. The threat, like we're all saying, is when they use it in their GCSE work, in their A-level work, and as public exams approach, are they losing those critical thinking skills required in the exam? So I think in terms of your question, when we introduce it to them, they're already using it, and I dare say primary school children are using it as well. And the complexity with which they use it obviously increases as the older they get. And our job, I think, is to guide them how to use it wisely.
Is it worth just clarifying some terms on that? So actually, if you go back to the terminology behind what AI is, Netflix, YouTube algorithms, those are all actually parts of the AI framework. What's actually shifted since 2022 is what we really mean by generative AI in terms of your platforms. So if any of your children are watching kids' YouTube or Netflix, they are already being exposed to those algorithms that have been basically pushing certain content to them. So they have been exposed to those, particularly in terms of the algorithm form, that kind of AI platforms for donkey's years, whether we knew it or not. What actually has shifted is the ability of them to generate content in a way that actually is now significant and easily accessible through whatever websites and platforms. And I think there's two elements to that as well. One is teaching about AI and actually students understanding what sits behind it in terms of things like the neural networks, and that comes with things like the environmental factors as well. And then there is then students engaging with it from the actual interaction. In all honesty, I think each parent is going to have to make their own mind up on that in terms of what goes on at home. I feel as a school, there is an age-appropriate responsibility that needs to be taken seriously. I don't actually think there is a right or a wrong answer to it, because I think what's important to it is what you are doing with it in terms of your education, and there are building blocks that need to be put in place for students to use AI in an effective way. If a student has had those building blocks built in from an earlier stage, there's nothing stopping them to use it correctly from an age of 14 or 15. I think what we're struggling with, generally speaking, is actually that sense of we need to get the education in there first so that the students can then know what are the right tasks to be using on AI. And particularly, the big thing I would say, if you're using it at home, is really encourage your children, if you're going to use it, to use proprietary systems rather than open systems, because then you can control what content they are going in. We can talk about more details later. So I wouldn't say it's a specific answer as to when, but it is about the age-appropriate building blocks and the understanding that needs to go in before they are then let loose on any kind of completely free, open, generative AI platforms.
One of the things I found particularly challenging with this whole situation is that the level of understanding and conceptual understanding one really needs in order to properly understand why there are certain risks with AI. And our children, certainly our children, are really pretty young to be understanding why using AI for a slightly more social emotional reason actually can be creating some significant problems down the line. We all know, those of us that have been working with it, you've got this positive affirmation bias built in. I mean, I heard a very good tip for the first time only yesterday, which I thought that makes perfect sense, is instead of telling AI what you want to be able to create and so forth, say, a friend of mine has come up with this idea, could you critique it and say whether this is valid and so forth? Because then it's not trying to tell you you're brilliant. It's actually going to critique the friend that's not you. Otherwise, it's going to say, oh no, absolutely, you're absolutely right. Yeah, what a great idea. That's quite tricky, certainly for younger children to be able to understand as well. So something that's playing on my mind is, as educationalists ourselves, we can make these connections, go, I can see exactly why that's the problem, but we know that kids don't respond very well to simply, don't do that, do this. We'll tell you why a bit later on.
Yeah.
One of the things that we are incorporating into our study skills programs, which we do at sort of first on entry and then sort of keep coming back to, we've massively expanded what we're doing on that. Actually, the older they get, the more overconfident they get. I don't need this, I've already done my GCSEs. So we call it cognitive psychology, which it is, right? How you learn how the brain works is cognitive psychology. And so we're teaching them that. And that's what we've all said is, you need to be educating them on how to use it and what the consequences are of misusing and so on. But again, I just need to ground this in the reality, that there are, the tools themselves. So first of all, ask yourself the question, what are we trying to get them to do? Is the most important thing, as it might be in the workplace, that I have a 10-page well-written document, or is the most important thing that my child has thought and changed the structure of their brain by writing this, right? If you need the product, fine, use AI, it's going to do it faster and better. That is almost never the case for a school child. It's almost never the case that you actually care about what the thing is. The world does not need another 140 essays on Macbeth written by 14-year-olds, right? The whole point of it is they have to have thought. So ask yourself, are they going to think harder or less? And if they're going to think less, then don't use it. And I would predict, and particularly the younger they are, there's almost no benefit the younger they are. Fine, use it if you want to, it's fun, just like junk food is fun. And no harm, right? I don't think we should be so scared of it that it's going to fry their brains by using it occasionally, but they're not going to learn very much from it. So keep your eye on the process, not the product. And that's one of the things that worries me about it, because imagine you get this wrong, and over the course of 5 or 10 or 13 years of education, your child has used it excessively and is coming up with things that, on their own efforts it would be at this level, but on using the AI assist, it's here. It's masking the symptoms. And the minute you take it away, the underlying skill is less, the underlying cognitive development is less. If you got it wrong, and you underused it, then for the course of that 13 years, they'll be, slightly below where they might be, but my goodness, it's not going to take them long to learn how to use it, right? You're not going to have to undo a decade's worth of under-preparation and learning less than they should. So in one sense, I just think it's not that complicated with children. What are you trying to get them to do? Think more or less? If it's more, look very carefully at what the effect of the AI will be. I think the answer will be fairly obvious.
I think that brings a really interesting question to educators about how we assess and what we assess. And what we need to continually assess is the thinking rather than the output. And I think that is going to be, and then there's a lot of conversations about the future of assessment and what that looks like, but universities are struggling with it, I think, even more than we are because of the contact we have with our students being so individual and understanding, but assessing the thinking and kids knowing it's the thinking we're assessing, not the output, is going to be fundamental.
And we're already seeing the top universities going more to pen and paper, going more to vivas, the things that can't disguise it. Like I said, back about 2 centuries.
I'm delighted you could read my notes from over there, Liz, because
Oh, sorry.
because this is exactly where I was about to just turn. And in fact, Elizabeth and I were part of the same meeting where a top university was saying exactly this, that actually they are, the people we were talking with were determined to try and wind it all back and just get them with a biro and a piece of paper in an exam hall, because that is the only way to actually guarantee that what you're getting is their own processing and learning that's come through. Similarly, jettisoning online interviews for student places, because you just pop an AI agent into your screen and it'll answer the questions live time as they're asked, and then you just read the answer out. And this is just scary stuff. We all know what we need to try and protect in terms of the quality of brain work, as you're saying, Elizabeth.
Tim, can I jump in there? Please. Because I am a big fan of the pen and the paper, but I wonder whether there might be a space for AI to help increase the accessibility of assessment for some children. If you imagine a long 10-mark question where it's essential that you get the first bit right in order to proceed through the question, if you have a thoughtful AI that can identify that the child can't get the first bit of the question right, needs a little bit of coaching, but then they can get through the rest of the question, then that can be picked up by the AI, where in a conventional pen and paper question, that wouldn't be assessed. And so maybe that's revealing something in the child that we wouldn't have known if it was a more traditional approach. So I think that might be something for us to look at in terms of assessment. But relatedly to what Elizabeth was saying, we are seeing the return of the viva for very different reasons. And to use that also as a sort of sense check that the children are producing work that's their own and they understand it. And it's fun.
Yeah, it is.
And it reveals skills that are going to be increasingly important in the workplace. If you can pass a viva convincingly, you're going to be marketable as an employee. Just those two points.
I was just going to add to what Scott was saying, that we're doing some research. We're helping Birmingham University with some research into a new AI app. And this could be the future of AI apps. It's the idea is for it to be more of a coach, and rather than just telling you the answers, what are the causes of the Peloponnesian Wars, it will say, well, what do you think, in a more Socratic way, lead you through it, coax the answers from you, and so you have this one-to-one personal tutor at home, which we're already playing around with agents to do that, but the agents in Copilot and ChatGPT that we've made, they just tell them the answer too quickly. And like we're all saying, it takes the critical thinking, it takes the struggling hard aspect out of it. Whereas if each child at home can have an AI tutor who will not tell them the answers, will make them do the work, then again, that could be a pretty powerful tool. And you talked about differences between state schools and independent schools. And I think many people are seeing AI as a levelling up tool, because if all you need is an internet connection and you have the access, to unlimited knowledge and unlimited skills. But like the panel was saying, though, what sets the independent sector apart is those extracurricular activities, extra opportunities. And Liz mentioned employability right at the start. We know my 3 children are now entering the world of work. And it's the Duke of Edinburgh, it's the DW, it's the sport, the music, the drama, those skills they persevered through, the resilience they've learnt outside the classroom, that are really the skills they're drawing on as they enter the workplace.
I'm conscious that we probably should try and move to some Q&A fairly shortly, but perhaps just as a plenary for this part of the discussion, if we were to perhaps try and take maybe 30 seconds each, if that's even possible, to think about, if we were designing the schools where we work now from a methodological hypothesis of a clean slate, from scratch, but from where we are today, how differently do we think we might approach the curriculum, the teaching, the assessment in light of AI, or indeed would we think that we would approach them differently? I'm not going to pick on a sequence here, but when you think your mind is formed enough on that little teaser, do feel free to...
I'll kick off if you like.
Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't look too different to what we have, I don't think. The problem is the challenge is devices, smartphones, I think, in school. So we have our pupils put them into pouches when they arrive in the morning. They're pouched all day and they can open their pouches at 4 p.m. But of course, being a day school, how they use their phone after that is a bigger challenge. So in my dream school, there would be absolutely no smartphones at all. It would be pen and paper with bookable devices, because IT is a huge, can be a huge advantage to learning. The extracurricular activities would still be as they are now. There'd be lots of sport, music, drama, opportunities and adventure. But it would be a school where the holy grail for me is being sure that the work they do at home, because it would be a day school, the work they do at home, how do I know that's their own work? And that's the challenge. So it's not so much what would my school look like, it's what would the home look like that they go home to. So yeah, so maybe boarding schools are the way forward.
I'll go next. I would completely redesign our assessment model.
Yeah.
I think we are in this bonkers world of making our kids jump through these hurdles every couple of years. Scrap the whole lot of them. Let them have a whole bunch of curious-based play stuff where they are investigating, they are being given rich subject knowledge where they can become real masters of domain-specific information, and they can be pushed and encouraged to nurture that passion in their subjects in a way that isn't focused on, can I get my A grade, can I get my 9? And yes, the biggest challenge is, well, what then do we do at the end of their education to demonstrate and prove what they've learned? But actually go back to that real question of, what are we wanting to do with our children? What do we want them to be as humans? And actually design a school based around that, rather than jumping through some hoops to get 8, 9s and A's and A stars.
I'm going to jump in because I completely agree with Sam. Just getting rid of a lot of the way we assess. And I think, how could we design an assessment system that generally looked at the character and the person and tried to capture that? It's such an easy thing to say, but so difficult to try and capture. And how can we build that in the curriculum? And I think also building on something Elizabeth said earlier, study skills can often be seen as this add-on on the side, but actually that needs to be at the very core rather than just one period a week to help you with all your subjects. You're like, well, that should be in every lesson all the time, underpinning how you learn, why you learn, how you develop, and somehow capturing and showing kids how in their thinking is improving. It's really hard to do that. And the only way they tell themselves it's improving is because they did really well in their GCSEs or really well in their IB. And we know that's not quite it. Well, it does, but not all of it. So yeah, I agree.
Well, I'm agnostic as to the technology generally. I'm pretty conservative on it and push it to the edges on the whole. But I mean, my school's 640-something years old, and we're still using the same buildings for the same kind of learning and the same, and what are the characteristics of it? Living in community, creating relationships which are incredibly rich, so inside the classroom and outside the classroom. It's that learning in community is the absolute ideal for me. And we privilege storytelling, right? There's no getting around the sort of the biology of how our brains work. We privilege storytelling. And there's a lot of talk about how teachers shouldn't talk too much, and it's terrible if they're all sitting in rows listening to a teacher talk. I'm like, that sounds fantastic, right? Like, for the right person, right? You know, you see someone on, I don't know, Rococo architecture or something, it is something I know nothing about, and the right person can make that incredibly appealing. So the sort of the community, the storytelling, being around people with infectious, the technology is kind of a non-issue. In a way, to those fundamentals. You know, we just have to be careful that we don't sleepwalk into allowing it to interfere with those fundamentals. But I think the point is really well made, Ian's point about sort of the role that parents have to play in this. As you look for schools for your children, really pay attention to the underlying values. And you know, I try and get out front with the things that I think are likely to be divisive about, you know, like you're either going to like what we do here or you're not, and it's best to get that out of the way now because you will get frustrated, but we actually want people who really see and buy into that. You know, I mean, it's all the essentials as it was 50 or 100 or indeed 600 years ago, I think. And we just need to make sure we don't let go of those values or allow them to be undermined by these sort of circumstances around us.
It's great to go last. Yeah. So I take healthy dollops of all of that that's been said. I think for me at Lansing it's important that there's some sort of vehicle within the curriculum that allows the children to follow their own passions and to have the good teachers alongside them turbocharging that passion. And I think having a part of the day each week where you can do that, maybe that's an extended project qualification space or something like it, I think is really, really important. And it only really works if you can pair the child up with a teacher that has a sort of similar interest and a similar expertise. And that's what we do. That's special. And if AI helps develop and turbocharge that passion, fantastic. But it's important that the space is there in the curriculum to do it. And the other thing, just very, very briefly, service. Massively important. I think we need to make sure that within our education, within our curriculum, there are opportunities for the children to give of themselves for others. And again, that's something that the independent sector does really well. And I would want to grow that in my ground-up school.
Nice.
Thank you. 12 minutes later, apologies. When you get people who are passionate about what they do, it's always going to be difficult to sum it up so quickly, but thank you. No, that was wonderful. And actually, you know, we've got some parents here who are still in the process of sort of thinking about senior schools for their children, Pilgrims parents, and so on. You know, you can go around, with respect to my esteemed colleagues here, you can go around so many senior schools and go, great, you've got an amazing sports centre, you've got some brilliant, lovely playing fields, you've got this, you've got that, yeah, so have all the other schools. What you need to be asking is what they think pedagogically and about teaching and learning and about AI, because this is what's going to define so much of the future that the boys are going into. There can be a stark difference between one approach and another, which could have a much more profound impact upon the boys than, you know, whether the swimming pool's got an extra 20 metres on it. So I think that's salutary to think about that. And just before we go to Q&A, one thing that was interesting in a conversation I had recently with a Pilgrims parent who's involved with a lot of AI startups is that something that he's thinking a lot about at the moment is what he was describing is essentially the lack of long-term linearity that AI can generate. That is about, you know, humans have resilience enough to keep something going and to project manage by being able to see the end and its iterative stages in between the beginning and where you want to go. AI currently works with everything that is immediately predictable as the next step, not the 17 steps down the road. And that was an interesting thing that perhaps has some sort of implications I need to be thinking about. But I think I'm quite lucky insofar as what we know the youngest children need is always going to remain pretty fundamentally the core necessities and so on. Particular point. Thank you so much for your time. I think it just goes to show that, you know, this is an area of deep passion. This is an area where I think we all appreciate the huge impact that this whole sphere will have. And it's been incredibly helpful and generous to have your time this morning, panellists. Thank you for understanding the different ways in which you're already having to contend with so much of what goes on. I think, in fact, as our last sort of couple of minutes was sort of saying, this changes so quickly. I mean, I started at the beginning talking a little bit about, about future reading. Well, we can turn ourselves into knots trying to read the future. What we do know, I think, as educationalists and as parents, is the fundamentals that will always enable us to have a strong human core of critical thinking, as you're saying, that will help us to respond to an ever-changing landscape. We can't potentially engage too much in the depths of that landscape at one point in a child's age range, when in 3, 4, 5 years' time, when they're in the workplace, things will move on. It's about those core skills, which I think we've all agreed upon this morning. So thank you so much for sharing all of your different angles and perspectives. There is a lot for us all to be thinking about. Would you please just join me in giving a round of applause?